Pocahontas, Chapter 2, Part 3. We're starting Part 3 in the middle of page 32. Remember that Pocahontas went to Jamestown to ask for the return of the captives that John Smith had taken. With the return of the captives, Powhatan's people kept more to themselves. As a favorite princess, Pocahontas would probably not have had to help with the planting or do as much work as the other girls her age did, but she would have helped care for the younger children. She may have woven baskets or sewn skins together for her skirts, decorated them with beads, gathered flowers for her hair. Pocahontas would not have visited John Smith's world this summer, for John was not there. Yet, to know her story, one must follow John too. And he was off exploring with a party of 14 men. He didn't find either the Pacific Ocean or a gold mine, but he did travel 3,000 miles, throughout Chesapeake Bay, up the Potomac River, nosing into inlets, following one crooked creek after another. He added new names on his map and drew new rivers and streams. He dug up some ore that might be silver. He saw animals, otters, beavers, martens, minks whose fur would certainly bring money in England, and fish. He had never seen so many fish. They were packed so thick in one place that the barge had to push through them. They looked like good eating fish too, but the men had no nets with them. John Smith grabbed a frying pan and tried to scoop some up in it, but as one explorer said, "We found it a bad instrument to catch fish with." Then John began spearing fish with his sword. This worked better. He would have done even better, however, if he had left the fish alone. He was pulling a flatfish with a long tail off his spear when suddenly the fish, a stingray, flipped its tail around and plunged it deep into John's wrist. The poison in the sting was so powerful that within a few hours John's hand, arm, and shoulder were so swollen, and he was in such pain that no one thought he would live. Carried ashore, he showed his friends the spot where he wanted to be buried and told them to start digging. It was maddening, of course, that one fish could do what the Indians and the Turks and even Ratcliffe and Archer had failed to do. But, as he always said, John Smith was a lucky fellow. In the end, the fish failed too. By night, the swelling was down. John Smith ate the stingray for supper, named the land Stingray Isle, known today as Stingray Point, and if he used the grave at all, it was only to bury fish bones. John returned from his explorations on September 7th, 1608, and as usual found trouble in Jamestown. This time President Ratcliffe had been acting up, taking food out of the storehouse so he could eat in style, ordering the settlers to build him a palace in the woods, acting like a king. Finally, the council had arrested him for mutiny, and on September 10th, John Smith was elected the new president. At last, John had a chance to prove what a little common sense could do for the settlement. He had plenty of ideas. No more shirking, for instance. The town still waited for repairs while men bowled in the streets, and no swearing. Bad language had become such a commonplace that a man couldn't even stub his toe without swearing. But a man might think twice, John figured, if a pitcher of water was poured down his sleeve every time he swore. With half a chance, John thought, he would turn Jamestown into a proper, businesslike settlement yet. But before John Smith had his chance, Captain Newport came sailing up the river with 70 new sailors, 2 of them women, the first to come. Newport also had instructions from London, which he said he had been given the authority to carry out. John read the instructions. Not one of them made sense. In the first place, the settlers were told to travel beyond the falls in the James River, where the ocean was supposed to be, and where there might also be gold. Excuse me. John Martin's gold hadn't been real this time either. The London Company had sent a barge knocked down into 5 parts so it could be carried over the mountains, around the falls, and assembled on the other side. A huge, awkward, heavy thing. John said the only way anyone could carry it was to burn it and carry the ashes in a bag. The London Company also sent a group of 8 Dutchmen and Poles to get the settlers started manufacturing glass and making pitch and tar. But the settlers didn't even have food for the winter, John pointed out. And Newport had brought no supplies this time. And London was talking about glass and tar? Furthermore, the London Company wanted Powhatan to be crowned in a ceremony that would make him a subject ruler under King James, loyal and obedient. For the ceremony, they sent Powhatan a huge bed, a basin and ewer, a scarlet coat, and a copper crown. The English were, of course, doing exactly what Powhatan had already tried to do when he adopted John Smith and made him a chief. It hadn't worked with John Smith, and it wouldn't work with Powhatan. He would just think, John predicted, that if he could get all these gifts for nothing, what was to keep him from asking for more and more? The settlers didn't have time to waste on such a silly idea, John said. They couldn't even carry that big bed 12 miles overland to Wokomoko. They'd have to take it by barge up the river, an 80-mile trip. Well, instructions were instructions, Captain Newport insisted. John could see that it was no use to argue. If only Powhatan would come to Jamestown to be crowned, then let him figure out how to get his bed back home. With 4 companions and the returning Namontack, John Smith went to Wokomoko to invite Powhatan to Jamestown for his coronation. But when John got there, Powhatan wasn't home. Pocahontas said her father was only a short distance away and she would send messengers to get him. Meanwhile, she was overjoyed to have John in her world. How she would entertain him and his friends, and feast them. She'd gather her sisters and friends together to dance for them. She would let John see how enthusiastically her people worshipped their God, how they painted themselves and sang for his pleasure, how they opened their hearts and tired out their bodies for his sake. Pocahontas ordered wood to be piled on the embers of the sacred fire, which was always kept aglow. She had mats placed on the ground for the 5 Englishmen. Then she and 30 of her friends ran into the woods to prepare for the ceremony. John did not know what to expect, but he had never imagined that 30 girls could make what he called such hellish shouts and cries. Nor had he dreamed the girls would come out armed, some with bows, some with arrows, some with swords, some clubs. All had their bodies painted, all wore horns attached to their heads. They did not look or sound like a friendly group, but when John jumped to his feet, Pocahontas stopped the dance. With one hand on her heart, the other raised high to call on the sun to be her witness, she promised that the English would not be harmed. John sat down, and for the next hour he watched the girls dance and sing around the fire, sometimes in such a frenzy of emotion that they seemed to him fiendish. He called the performance an antic, by which he meant it was a kind of freak show. But for Pocahontas, it must have been an ecstasy. With John there, surely her spirit soared into the sky beyond the blue even. And so we're going to stop here with part 3. We will continue with part 4 in the next video.